Okay, hello, my friends. I only have four big stories for today, but they are big, big, big stories. I can't explain how big these stories are. Okay, what you're looking at here is a map of all the oil refineries and depots that have been hit inside Russia over the past, well, since the beginning of 2024. Here's Ukraine, and these make sense, and these make sense. But here's Moscow. They can hit them here, here, even all the way out here. It's pretty remarkable. Now, it's not anything like the devastation of the Ukrainian electricity grid, but it's still Ukraine's punching back, and this is important. Okay, first big story that's a really, 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 really big story is this. Resources of war. Can Russia sustain its war in Ukraine for years? With some infographics. Russia's artillery may deplete by 2025. Tank reserves are sufficient until 2027. Armored vehicles may degrade within 3 to 4 years. The financial strain is growing, but manpower remains stable. So let's look at those about five different factors. So first, artillery. Artillery looks the most vulnerable. Artillery barrels show that at the current rate of firing, Russia needs about 2.5 to 4,000 barrels per year. We're talking about the howitzers that they're fired from, not the rounds of ammunition. If we add this to the direct losses in battle, Russian total needs about 4 to 5,000 per year. So when we're talking about barrels, I looked this up, after 2,500 rounds, a barrel can become unsafe. And so that becomes a problem. And they work through a lot of rounds pretty much every day. Okay, so the critical point is somewhere here, and so this is 2025, somewhere between 2025 and 2026. Artillery, unless they can buy it elsewhere, is going to become a problem with the numbers that they have. And artillery is the way that they tend to fight wars. They tend to just barrage and destroy things and then kind of move in. Before the invasion, Russia had almost 17,000 artillery units in long-term storage warehouses. Satellite images indicate that at least 9,000 units have already been removed from warehouses during the 2 years of the war. And what we know about the artillery losses is that so far there's been about 14,000 artillery pieces removed from the battlefield. Russia will probably have to reduce the intensity of artillery use to approximately 5,000 shells per day. I mean, I read that and I went, reduced to 5,000 shells per day? Yes, that's what it's saying. This will allow it to extend the resource of artillery for at least 1 to 2 more years. Okay, so that's where we are with artillery. Tanks. The situation with tanks is completely different. Russia has enough tanks to sustain the war until at least 2027 to 2029, but Russia has restrictions on the production and restoration of tanks. The initial tactics of the Russians were based on heavy shock columns of armored vehicles, which fell into ambushes and traps. You remember that long road of tanks and that sort of thing. Russia increased production in 2023 and can now supply about 1,500 tanks per year, taking into account the restoration of old tanks. Now, when you look at that, when I talk about this in the mornings, I'll say, okay, X number of tanks are off the battlefield. The replication rate's about 3 to 4. That's what we're talking about here, because if you take the 1,500, that's a higher number than I saw before, but nonetheless, divided by 365 of what they can do, it's about 4 tanks per day that they can put back onto the battlefield if they are being judicious about it. So the further Russia looks into its military formations, the worse the equipment will be. Satellite images say that approximately 30 to 40% of the tanks cannot be restored. They are disassembled in the open air, often without engines or turrets. So down the line, they won't be able to replace that many that quickly. Okay, so it'll be more and more difficult for Russia to replenish its losses. Gradually, this should lead to exhaustion, but again, it'll take years. This was just a video about how many tanks were produced. Like the Soviets spent years just mass producing tanks. This is just the 1947 to present, just the T-54, T-55, 100,000 produced. Yeah, so they have plenty of tanks. They're not running out anytime soon. Here we're in 2024 now, 2025, 2026, 2027 by the time it starts to become critical. So I wouldn't count on them running out of tanks anytime soon. Now, with armored vehicles, the situation is similar to tanks, but here Russian warehouses do not look so bottomless. If Russia does not change its tactics, this may lead to degradation of armor in the next 3 to 4 years. Again, 2024, 2025, 2026, and by 2027, they're going to be in a world of hurt unless they can import these or become a mass producer of them sometime in the near future. Okay, soldiers. Now, this is the least problematic. And you'd think when you're looking at something like this, 500,000 losses, how can they do it? But they can do it. And the reason that they can do it is they have more forces than they need. Human resources are probably Putin's most reliable weapon. Russia did everything to ensure that the military never ran out. Every year, Russia conscripts more people into military services than it mobilizes into the army. This line here is active soldiers. This line here, that's about 1.5 million active soldiers, and this line here is its military reserve of 10 million. So we shouldn't count on Russia just running out of soldiers because that's not the way that they think. Funding. This year, Russia budgeted an optimistic 390 billion in income, and again, it's not a unlimited amount, but they have enough money to keep going. Now, this military budget has risen year over year to 17%, 20, 25, 37 in 2024, 40% in 2025, and they have enough money to keep going, and that's not the issue. So the summary is this. Russia's resources are not limitless, but Ukraine needs military and economic support in order to withstand the struggle. Russia will have to revisit its tactics and goals in 2025 and 2026, or they risk finding themselves at a critical point. So the main task of the West should be the tactics of maximum exhaustion of Russia. Why? After all, the question is not whether Putin wants to attack NATO countries. The only question is whether he will be able to do it. So to the degree that Ukraine can destroy Russian tanks and artillery and vehicles, it's not only protecting Ukraine, but NATO as well. Okay, third big, huge story. I don't even know how to describe how huge, how massive, how important this story is. Russia pushes for a new Eurasian security architecture as an alternative to NATO. I think I've seen little pieces of this coming together for a long time. So this is what I think Putin ultimately wants to achieve. He wants the multipolar world back where the Soviet Union was counterbalancing the West. That's what he's going for, I think. The US-based Institute for the Study of War reported on 22 June that Russian leader Vladimir Putin's initiative to establish a new Eurasian security architecture is likely part of ongoing efforts to form a coalition of friendly states that could serve as an alternative to the West. Yeah, that's exactly what Putin wants. Putin reiterated on 21 June that he intended to create equal and indivisible security in Eurasia, and he wants to be the leader of that security apparatus. So, if you cobble together the various organizations that are in Asia, like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Eurasian Economic Union, and the BRICS, and you put them all together and you can make them into some kind of defensive alliance, that would be what Putin's actually after. Now, let me show you what this looks like. This is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's really centered around China, which is why it's called Shanghai, but nonetheless, they all kind of work together and trade together. But it's not a military apparatus. This is the Commonwealth of Independent States. Ukraine's no longer anywhere near it. They're disputed countries here. These in light green, they're not actually members, they're observers. So it's really mostly just the dark green countries, and which it means essentially Belarus and Russia, Kazakhstan, and a couple of other stans. That's pretty much it. They're more likely to be a core of what could be a new Warsaw Pact. Then you have the Eurasian Economic Union, and this is a small trading bloc. That's all. I mean, it's the same kind of countries overlapping small trading bloc. And then you have the BRICS plus. Now, the BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and then they're working on getting other countries involved like Egypt and Ethiopia and Saudi Arabia and some others. And to the degree that they can form this unit, if you overlay all these countries, it looks pretty powerful. But At the moment, they're only economic trading blocs, but Putin would love to have them as a Warsaw Pact-like alliance against the West. Now, this helps to explain Putin's recent trip to North Korea and the inclusion of Vietnam, a country not typically considered part of Eurasia in political terms. The groundwork for this Eurasian security structure was initially laid during Putin's visit to the People's Republic of China in May of 2024. He later proposed it in a speech in 14 June, claiming that the Euro-Atlantic security system is collapsing and the Western schemes for security and prosperity in Europe do not work. This strategy could be used to posture as an alternative to NATO while supporting ongoing Kremlin information operations that aim to portray Western countries as Ukraine's only supporters, that they're isolated, that the rest of the world really doesn't care about Ukraine. The rest of the world supports Russia. Okay, final story. President Putin declares that Russia will accept Palestinian refugees to help relieve the humanitarian crisis. Now, while Israel tried to maintain good relations with Russia, Putin has very clearly leaned into the Palestinian side of the conflict. And now Putin's willing to accept Palestinian refugees. I would be very nervous if I was a Palestinian refugee coming to Russia because I think I would find myself on the front lines in Ukraine before very long, or at least a fraction of them will be, in my estimation. But I could be wrong. Tell me what you think about that. Finally, propagandists like Solyov say, "We're fighting all of NATO," and they say that fairly regularly. And NATO's reply, "You're losing against our surplus stores." And there's something to that. I mean, there's something really true about that. NATO's not actually fighting, and hopefully they won't, but if they were, this would be a very different story. All right, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.